Hello everybody and welcome back to KXP. We were pretty saddened to see what befell the POV crowd in the last episode, so we are going to take all the precautions we can to make sure that we don't befall the same fate with our own Kerbals. And so before we send up our rescue craft, we are going to take a second and do some of the tedium work of setting up a communications network around the Mun. We're going to grab this contract. It is very simple. It's very vague. All it requires is that we have 95% connection on the Mun. It doesn't require our satellites to be in any particular orbit or anything like that. So it's going to be pretty easy. We are, however, going to do our best to get ourselves a stable comms net for the Mun, because I don't know that we're going to have the ability to send a craft with a pilot to pick up our pilot and engineer. I don't know that we will have a 3-seater to bring them back in. So I think we're going to try to make it a probed control, return craft. And so we're going to need a network up there so we don't lose control based on where our Kerbals are on the Mun. And so we only have 7 contracts available that we can take, and as much as I would like to grab the Start Exploring Mid-Miss and do a flyby of it, I feel like we need to settle some of the contracts that we already have, because we may be able to grab some more relevant ones soon. So you see here we have a lot of scan sats that would be good. I think if we could get a scan sat of Mid-Miss before we even send our rovers or our Kerbals there, that'd be great. We're going to take the scan sat for the Mun, however, we're not going to do that in today's episode. It's going to be another time. We do need to upgrade our launch pad. The rocket that we had was a little bit too tall. And we're also going to upgrade the administration building because we have the money to do so. And by selecting massive scale launches 2, we'll actually receive funds and reputation when we get large crafts up into orbit. And now that we have a lower lifting engine that is overpowered to the point that we can get it into orbit without losing it. So that means that every single launch that we make from this point forward is going to be gaining us money. A small amount of money, probably not more than the rocket itself is worth, but money nonetheless. So let's go ahead and go into our vehicle assembly building. I'm going to show you what I built. It's nothing too complicated, nothing that haven't seen before on my channel, but essentially I just made a tall rocket with 4 different little CommsNet satellites on it that we are going to put into a specific orbit and then release and just let it hang out in said designated orbit. But here we have, it's a bunch of batteries, a probe core, some solar panels, and some high gain antennas, 4 of them, 1 pointed towards the active vessel, 1 pointed towards Kerbin, 1 to the Mun, and 1 to Mid-Miss, because this is actually a pretty decent CommsNet satellite. We got pretty decent range with those dishes, so we're going to want to point at Mid-Miss. And since we recently unlocked the Pila engine, we have no fear that this will not make it to orbit. I am going to include the full unedited footage, however it is going to be sped up a little bit for time's sake, but this is pretty much just a tedium mission. It's just a lot of getting to orbit, getting to the Mun, getting back into orbit, and then readjusting the orbit to fine-tune the position of said satellites. But, you know, if that's something you're interested in, this is definitely the episode for you. I'll kind of go over the process of how I got these satellites into position, and you can see as I go along. And, you know, if this isn't your cup of tea exactly, I apologize, but it is something that is necessary to do with the mods that we're playing. Remote tech is unforgiving when it comes to probe signal and probe control. So, unfortunately, it's something that we have to do. Oh, there you see we got some money for our massive scale program. But now it's time to burn out to the moon. But as I was saying, I'll just finish up. We actually have some pretty big plans coming up in the next few episodes. So we will be getting back to the milestones and the interesting missions soon. But nonetheless, it has to be done. So we are going to aim for about 1,500,000 meter, or 1,500 kilometer, 1,500 kilometer orbit, and as close to that 1,500, 00.0 kilometer as much as possible. So the trick to getting a well-working comms net is to make it so that way the satellites never lose position relative to each other, and that way you can make sure that you have the full amount of control necessary. I did unfortunately forget to put explosives on the lower stage, so we now have some space trash that's just going to be hanging out in a high elliptical orbit above Kerbin. And so we'll have to take care of that at some point. I do intend later on in the series, when we get the ability to, when we get access to decent space planes and SSTOs, I think I'm going to take a day in both KXP and POV. We're going to take some time and clean up space trash. I've been thinking about it. I'm like, I could just, I could go into mission control, or the tracking station, excuse me. I could go into the tracking station and just delete all the debris and just be done with it. But I think it'd be more fun to rendezvous and try to meet up with it, and then maybe get an engineer out on EVA that attaches a set of explosives and goes ahead and clears it that way. I think that'd be kind of fun. I've done something like that in my own playthrough before, but just once, because rendezvousing is hard, and after I did that, I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that for every single piece. But if we can perfect a craft that can get to orbit, rendezvous with a piece of trash, destroy it, and then get back home safely, or even to another piece of space trash, then that might be worthwhile. Spend some time doing that. But that is neither here nor there. That is for a later episode. But as we see here, we are adjusting our final approach to make sure that we come in as close to 1,500 as possible. We actually had to lower our throttle down very low. I think it's actually at like 1% right now, because I really want to come in very accurately. And even then, I did not stop exactly where I needed to be. So I hit on our RCS, turn that on, and just use that to ever so slightly adjust my orbit. Let's go ahead and turn our throttle control back up to 100, point ourselves towards our maneuver, plot it into Flight Computer, and then we'll time warp our way to it. And there is the Mun in its full glory. As we pass our periapsis, we slow our time warp and burn. And the Terror engine is really efficient in a vacuum, and this is not too heavy of a craft, so it takes no time at all for us to get into a stable orbit. And there we go. Our apoapsis and periapsis are below 150,000 or 1.5 thousand kilometers. So we are going to have to make some adjustments as we go along. Like I said, this episode is a lot of just kind of fine tuning, using our RCS to bring our apoapsis and our periapsis up and down, and then time warping till we get to the other one, and so on and so forth. We're going to lower our thrust on this several times over, and eventually we end up finalizing it down to 1% throttle on these as well. And that ends up working pretty nicely. When it comes to RCS, if you're trying to utilize it to fine-tune your orbit like this, it's good to have it at its lowest thrust possible. Let's see, I'm turning it down from 21 down to 7, and I'll go even farther from there. Should have tested that out in the test flight. I could have just changed those in the VAB, and that would have been good. But with an apoapsis of 1.4999 millimeters and a periapsis of 1.49909, it's pretty decent. It's a decent enough that we can go. But the important part, the most important part when dealing with a comms net like this, is the orbital period. And our orbital period, you can see that right below the periapsis on the left, is 2 days, 3 hours, 9 minutes, 24.58 seconds. And so, doesn't matter what our apoapsis or periapsis are, as long as each of these satellites has an orbital period of around that time, as close to exactly that time as possible, then they will never shift out of position with themselves. So now the next step is to lower. You can either lower or raise your periapsis or raise your apoapsis. They both do different things respectively, but we are going to lower our periapsis so that way we are no longer on the same exact orbit as the satellite that we just let go. So that satellite will now remain in that orbit and just stay there until the end of time, because we don't have end body physics. So that'll just be there. So now we are pulling away from that satellite, and our orbital period dropped to 1 day, 3 hours, 15 minutes. So that means that when we reach our apoapsis yet again, we will not be in line with the satellite that we just dropped off, but rather that satellite will now be at a different angle for us. So as we time warp our way forward, at our apoapsis, we have a maneuver to recircularize yet again. And now that puts us in line with the first satellite that we did. We can see and we have connection to it. So all I need to do now is fine-tune our periapsis and apoapsis until they're closer to the altitudes that I want them. And then once we have that, we are going to fine-tune our orbital period, because it's currently 2 days, 3 hours, and 8 minutes. And as you may remember, it needs to be 2 hours and 9 minutes, 24 seconds. So at our apoapsis, we point retrograde. It doesn't matter, it's retrograde or prograde, one of the two. And then we use our RCS to fine tune. And as you can see now, we are sitting at 2 days, 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 20 seconds. So it's not exactly perfect. So if we just play around a little bit more, we can get close. So we got 24.8. And if you remember, it was 24.58. But that, half of a second is not too terrible. But it does get me to turn my thrust down to 1. And as you can see now, I have a lot more control, a lot more fine detail control. So we get that as close to the orbital period as we want, and we go ahead and launch that off as well. I know that we have communication with the KSC because the current craft that we have has communication to the KSC, and each one of these satellites is just a duplicate of the one before it. So this is going to be good enough to get our probes to have full connection wherever it is on the MUN covered by these satellites. As long as these satellites have connection to Kerbin, then we should be fine. Which is going to be good because we can send some rovers here. We don't necessarily have to risk Kerbals all the time. We do need to get a flag to our Kerbal so they can safely plant it on the MUN, but as far as the rest of it goes, we can collect all the science that we need from the MUN via probes, and if we have this network in place, then it'll be easy. So we reach our apoapsis again, but as you see here, it wasn't an ideal location for the satellite, so we're going to go ahead and just time warp away around over and over again until we find a nice position where the three of our satellites are balanced out and they can all see each other, and they won't fall out of position with each other. So let's plot it into Flight Computer, turn ourselves towards our maneuver node, time warp our way there, and as we get ready to fire, we see that we are yet again kind of in a not in a great place with the previous satellite. So we are going to actually circularize from here. However, as we see, the angle of these 3 satellites, it's not ideal. So we're going to actually cancel that last maneuver and bring our orbit back down to something a little more elliptical. I accidentally targeted one of the satellites, and that's why I'm getting all that extra information there. Didn't mean to do that. It takes me a couple seconds to figure out which satellite was the one, but once we get it untargeted, we can get back to changing our orbit. And we have plenty of Delta V, and we don't need to return back to Kerbin at any point, and we're just making micro adjustments here and there. So it's not a bad thing to have to redo that maneuver. We're not in any danger of failing the mission. So we're going to go ahead and time warp our way around a little faster than I would have liked, but nonetheless, we've got plenty of time. The Kerbals on the surface of the Mun have 80 days worth of life support, so we can take a little bit of time to time warp, but we should be careful with that because once again we are using TAC life support. So we're going to bring down our periapsis even lower to hopefully get a better position. It seemed like we were arriving at the same point every single time. So now we went a little bit faster around our orbit each time, and that allowed us enough of a distance between the 2 satellites that we already have, because they are actually on opposite sides of the orbit from each other, which is really nice because then if we can get another satellite placed in between both of them on either side, we'll have a nice square. As we look at our contracts, we actually have successfully created the network from the Mun as well as fully mapped out the Mun. So we completed 2 contracts there. And yeah, so this has been fairly successful already. And we are almost done. We have 2 more satellites to deploy. Let's go ahead and get our throttle limiter down to really fine-tune our orbit. Point ourselves towards our node. It's only going to be a 0.7 second burn, so even with Flight Computer and even with the throttle limited to 1%, it's really tiny of a burn, but it'll just be a little bit more accurate than our RCS. So we got that burn done. We have an orbital period of 2 days, 3 hours, and 7 minutes, and we're going to just use our RCS to fine-tune that a bit. We're going to warp our way to the apoapsis and spend some more time just adjusting, because that's what these missions really are. That's why I called it a TDM mission, because it's just ever so slightly adjusting those numbers until they're perfect. But by adjusting those numbers until they're perfect means that we don't have to worry about this network at all. You know, it'll never fall out of sync. It'll never be a situation where we no longer have communications with the Mun. So with an apoapsis of 1.5 millimeters and a periapsis of 1.49 and an orbital period that's only 0.2% of a second off from the orbital period, everything was good for for the second to last satellite to be deployed. Now all we got to do is put that last one in, the 4th one on the opposite side of where this one is, and then we will have a nice square of communication along the Mun. Thank you so much for watching this far, by the way. It's one of those things is like, sometimes I do really, really interesting missions where I'm like, I can't wait to show you guys this stuff. And then sometimes these missions where it's like, yeah, it's cool, you know, it's cool to get a communications network up on the Mun, but, you know, it's not anything groundbreaking. You don't get to see the dangers of trying to land on something, or the intrigue of an EVA or anything. I guess probes maybe are just less interesting. No, because even landing probes is interesting to me. But doing stuff like station keeping and satellite CommsNet building and all that stuff isn't the most entertaining to me. So I kind of assume that sometimes people may not be interested in this stuff. But, if you're watching this far, then thank you so much. I'd rather have an episode that's a little bit tedious than just kind of skip it entirely and just, rush through the program, because I think the career mode aspect, the challenge of doing this all in career mode, is part of the intrigue of a playthrough. And then the other part is that sometimes you want to see, every little piece that goes along. Some of y'all may be playing along, watching along while you play your own games. And, if I skip the tedium like this, if I skip putting a satellite network up and just do it off camera, and it's like, oh yeah, we got full control over the MUN because we have a network. And it's like, well, where'd you get that network from? So it's not every episode can be the perfect banger, but thank you so much for watching every episode. All right, so now we are close to getting into position. We have no connection here, which is a little strange. I was wondering what happened, but it was quickly fixed after that, so it must have been just a tiny little eclipse or something, or maybe Kerbin was, or the KSC was on the opposite side of Kerbin, because we actually don't have a really stable comms net above Kerbin. That is going to be one thing that I'm going to notice at the end of this episode, is one of our missions was not completed, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, what? Why isn't it completed? I got everything done, but it turns out that the mission was for a comms net above Kerbin and not the MUN. We had one for the MUN, but the one that I was confused why we didn't complete, that was for comms net for Kerbin. So we will have to revisit communications network at one point again in order to have full control of our probe at all times. There we go. We're just doing slight adjustments. Our orbital period is 2 days, 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 32.4 seconds. So we're going to need to bring that up a little bit. We're going to point ourselves towards, or we're going to time warp our way to our periapsis and point ourselves prograde. And then tiny little adjustments on the RCS will bring us into our final resting point. There are 2 days, 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 23 seconds. So each one of them are off. Yeah, see, this is me looking at the network or at the communications contract and being like, I did the wrong one. But it's okay because we needed a network for the MUN anyways. But with that, I'm going to bring this episode to a close. We did get the milestone of a fully complete communications network for the MUN, which is good. It's not a huge milestone, but important nonetheless. We did beat POV to it. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KXP. If you did, think about subscribing. Drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.